Russia and Putin's influences are eroding even more than you might have thought. Something serious is breaking in the post-Soviet world, and this time it's not merely about Ukraine. From those military failures in Ukraine to diplomatic breakdowns in Central Asia, and now a seeming dramatic collapse of authority in the South Caucasus. Just when it looked like things couldn't get worse for Putin in Ukraine, over Iran, or domestic economic pressures, reports are emerging that Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Turkey are finalizing a deal to build a major transport corridor. Putin effectively is cut out of the South Caucasus, and the symbolism behind what may well be the unstoppable decline of Russia's global influence.
This is The Global Gambit.
How you going? Welcome to the channel. Now, this isn't the kind of story that breaks overnight and will get the most important headlines. It's the kind that brews quietly until it suddenly explodes. Now, in the case you weren't aware, tensions between Russia and Azerbaijan have been simmering for months over Nagorno-Karabakh, Azerbaijan's relationship to Armenia, and a fair few other things, including the influence of Turkey. But why now specifically? Well, they've boiled over into one of the worst diplomatic breakdowns in years. It starts with the death of two ethnic Azeri men during Russian police raids, but it ends, or you could argue begins, with an entire geopolitical realignment that could reshape the South Caucasus and leave Russia even more humiliated and sidelined than people argue it is already. So let's unpack exactly how we got here and why this moment might mark the beginning of the end for Putin's role and Russia more broadly, at least in this region. So let's start with some context. June 27th, Yekaterinburg, the fourth largest city in Russia and deep within its Ural region. Russian police launched a sting operation. Their targets were 6 ethnic Azeri men accused of being part of a crime ring allegedly linked to murders stretching back over 2 decades. But during the raids, 2 brothers, Ziyaidin and Hussein Safarov, were killed. Russian officials claimed one died of a heart attack, but autopsies in Baku revealed a very different story. Severe blood loss, massive trauma, signs of torture. Azerbaijani's Prosecutor General opened a murder case, an investigation, the Foreign Ministry quickly accusing Russia of unacceptable violence. Baku has seemingly erupted in the past week, and for many in Azerbaijan, this wasn't just brutality, it was humiliation. As much as Russia was focused on its own efforts internally, this has now spread into Azerbaijan's own backyard, and they have hit back very hard. Now, the response has been swift and sweeping. Russian cultural events across the country have been cancelled, bilateral meetings scrapped, including a visit from the Deputy Prime Minister of Russia abruptly called off. Sputnik and its Azerbaijani offices have been raided, despite recent rebranding, while also 2 Russian intelligence officers were arrested inside Azerbaijan. All this clearly illustrating, therefore, that this is not merely a protest. It is a very clear message. Azerbaijan President Aliyev, already suspicious of Moscow after a December plane crash, more on that in a second, likely caused by panicked Russian air defences, has made it clear Baku is done playing by Putin and the Kremlin's rules. And that takes us, therefore, to the bigger picture. For context, in December of 2024, an Azerbaijani air flight attempted to land in Grozny during a Ukrainian drone strike. Because of that, it was struck with foreign metal objects, killing 38 people. Footage from the site showed holes across the fuselage, signs that the aircraft may have been accidentally hit by Russian air defense systems. Putin offered a rare apology to Aliyev, but stopped short of accepting any blame. Aliyev wasn't impressed. Shortly after, Azerbaijan began closing Moscow-funded cultural centres, denying Russian officials entry for quote-unquote offensive behaviour, and cracking down on Kremlin media. It has certainly set the tone for what would follow in Yekaterinburg 6 months later. And then we get to the geopolitical bombshell. As you know, I like to connect the dots between the big and the small. And if you appreciate those efforts, then do consider subscribing and at least liking the video. I'm curious what you think about this and whether or not it's a bigger deal or not. drop a comment below. Unconfirmed but widely circulated reports claim that Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Turkey have effectively reached a behind-the-scenes agreement on opening the Zanguzur Corridor, a critical transport route linking Azerbaijan to its Nakhchivan exclave, and then on to Turkey and Central Asia more broadly. Why is this significant? Well, Russia has been entirely excluded. Many have seen for the decades before, be it Russia or the Soviet Union, that the Caucasus are Russia's backyard, and Russia, as the great power, dictates the terms. Turkey has a regional influence, but does not have the capacity to go toe-to-toe with the Kremlin. Now, that's clearly not the case anymore. The corridor was originally part of the post-Karabakh Cease framework. Moscow was supposed to oversee and enforce it. But now, Azerbaijan and Turkey are cutting the Kremlin out altogether. It should be noted as well that the two have a very unique relationship. Indeed, one former leader of Azerbaijan effectively calling them one nation, two states because of their cultural intricate ties. Now, sources suggest the deal was quietly struck during the Armenian President Pashinyan's recent visit to Istanbul, when he met with President Erdogan. If finalized, therefore, the Zanguzur Corridor would boost trade between Central Asia and Europe, deepen connectivity between these Turkic nations, and tie Armenia economically to Turkey and Azerbaijan, really reducing its dependence on Russia at a time when many, including myself, were fearful of what could happen to Armenia given its inability to protect itself without support from Russia. It would also therefore strengthen the Trans-Caspian and North-South transport corridors, bypassing Russian infrastructure altogether too. In short, it is one of the most significant strategic snubs Putin could suffer. A lot of alliteration there. And it comes at the worst possible time. So the crackdown in Yekaterinburg wasn't just about old murder cases. It has exposed the dark truth about Russian law enforcement. As I mentioned in another video, Russia is already cracking down in even more ways in terms of what you can say or do in the country. The way that ethnic minorities, especially Central Asians and Azeris, are often scapegoated or brutalized. Azerbaijani analysts say this reflects a wider playbook used by the Kremlin. Blame authorities during times of unrest, shift public anger from economic woes to foreigners, and use police violence to maintain order. But this time, Baku didn't simply just stay quiet and take it. It's punched back, and quite significantly. And for Russia, that's new, dangerous, and completely unfamiliar. So zoom out, and the signs of Russian decline are everywhere, seemingly in the South Caucasus. Armenia increasingly aligns with the West, or now Turkey, Russia's main competitor. Azerbaijan embraces Turkey and openly defies Moscow. Georgia, meanwhile, continues to protest Russian interference. And then, of course, you have Russian peacekeepers that have been forced out of Nagorno-Karabakh. Turkish drones are replacing Russian tanks, and Kremlin influence is no longer a given, seemingly non-existent. It has to be earned, and Moscow is losing even that battle. Then there are even allies like Kazakhstan, which are hedging. The Collective Security Treaty Organization, or CSTO, never really has been anything, but now it is basically crumbling. And Russia's own version of the European Union, the Eurasian Economic Union, looks more and more irrelevant by the day, if it ever was. So the South Caucasus, once a Soviet stronghold, is no longer bending to Putin's will and symbolizes a Russia that really is struggling to exert its influence in a way that Putin would like to claim that it is. It's interesting how the deaths of two men have lit a fuse. But the explosion we're seeing now is far more from merely Yekaterinburg. This is about empire, humiliation, about the slow motion collapse of Russian influence in a region it has once entirely controlled. And if the Zanguzur Corridor deal does go through, well, that's not just a diplomatic snub, that is a strategic and economic earthquake. Russia's sphere of influence is shrinking fast, and the South Caucasus, a new reality is emerging, one where Putin no longer can call the shots, even if he can claim he is in his own country. So I hope you enjoyed that video. If you're new here, my name is Pyotr. I am, well, a mixture of English and Russian, actually, having been brought up predominantly in the West, but with significant influences from Slavic and specifically Russian roots. And so that mix is never easy. navigating both worlds certainly feels like walking a tightrope at times. Moreover, I have studied and worked in both places for, well, the best part of my adult life. Having gotten a master's degree at Johns Hopkins and working in places like the UN and the World Bank, I tried to bring those experiences to shed light on these very multifaceted issues. And precisely on that, this channel is about not simply staying in one specific lane, but being more holistic and to cut through the noise, to not sanitize difficult truths, not parrot specific sides, and offer a holistic, sometimes uncomfortable, but hopefully insightful look at how the world really works. So if that's something you value, resonates with you, then do consider subscribing and ringing the bell for when I bring on a great degree of different guests from journalists, diplomats, and former heads of state. But we'll see you on the next one. Take care, everyone.